Welcome to Veritus Group's webinar, 3 Objectives for Success in Mid-Level Fundraising. Today we'll be hearing from Jeff Schreifels, Principal of Veritus Group, and Lisa Robertson, our Director of Client Services. Jeff and Lisa are experts in mid-level fundraising and have developed many of the tools and strategies we use every day in our work with clients. Welcome, Jeff and Lisa.
Thanks, Karen. All right, Lisa, this is going to be fun. I love doing this with you.
I love being here, Jeff.
All right, so let's have fun. Okay, that's me. Been doing this for a long time, but it's been a lot of fun. And Lisa?
That's me. Yeah, I've been doing this a long time, but we both just still look like we're in our mid-20s, I'm sure. But I'm really glad to be here, and I do love mid-level, and I am coming to you today from our remote office here in Fort Worth, Texas. So glad to be here with you all.
Awesome. All right, now before we get started on today's topic, I just wanted to share a bit about who we are at Veritus. Now, some of you on this call may be pretty familiar with us, but for those who aren't, our vision is to help nonprofits create a culture and fundraising approach that creates transformational relationships with their donors. And this dynamic is critical to the system, structure, and strategy that we have found to be successful in mid, major, and plan giving programs. We believe that for your organization to actually achieve your mission, you need to shift how you see donors in their role in your organization, but that you also need to create partnerships internally and within your community. We've worked hard to ground our approach in objective fact, not our personal opinion. We've formed our recommendations through insight from analysis of millions of donor records, and we work with thousands of fundraisers and leaders over the years. And we've gotten to work with some pretty phenomenal organizations over the years that have helped us learn and develop our strategy and our approach.
And we really do believe that mid-level programs are one of the best investments that you can make right now. There's been a lot of hype, right, Jeff, around mid-level over the last few years, but it's really now clear how valuable this work is, and it can be when you approach it in a relationship-focused way. So our promise to you is this, that if you follow our advice today, you'll set your organization up to create a successful mid-level program that will thrive, it'll meet goals, and support the entire pipeline. And there's a reason we can be so confident. Now, why can we be so confident? Well, because we worked with hundreds of nonprofit fundraisers and leaders, and we know how mid-level programs can really transform your work with donors. In fact, we've calculated results for key clients. Before starting a mid-level program, they had a value of attrition of 45%. And Jeff, you're going to dive into that more in a minute.
Yeah.
But after 1 year, the average revenue had increased by 15%. That's a major swing, right? From a negative where you're losing revenue to increasing revenue. And that's just one measurement. So we'll also talk a little bit about the success that organizations have had in cultivating donors and then developing that donor pipeline.
Yeah.
So our objective is really to start things off. We want to talk about one of the 3 objectives, which is keeping your donors. So when you think about fundraising in the upper part of the donor pipeline, there's this dual purpose that needs to be achieved, where you need to secure the funds for your organization and you need to fulfill the donor's passions and interests. This is more of a priority as you move into major gifts, but in mid-level, that's where you lay the foundation for that start of a relationship.
Exactly. But to achieve this dual purpose, you need to actually retain your donors so that they're engaged and actively connected to the organization. Otherwise, you'll struggle to move donors into major gifts where you can more deeply achieve those 2 goals. So what's getting in the way of this process, and how can a mid-level program help? Well, there are 2 main problems that a mid-level program directly addresses: donor attrition and value attrition. First, let's address this from a donor retention perspective. If we zoom out for a moment, our industry has a major retention problem. Donor retention over the last 5 years has gone down dramatically. And honestly, the 50% retention we're seeing years ago is poor when you compare it to the for-profit sector. But now most nonprofits are lucky if they get 41% retention overall. And that means you're having to put out a lot of effort and money to acquire donors that you're not retaining. And to address this issue, we need to really understand the problem and identify the right solutions for your donors. So let's look at value attrition and what we mean by that. If you look at this chart here, you can look at like donor number 4. In year 1, where they started giving $10,000, and then by year 4, they were only giving $4,100. So we lost $5,900 in value over that time period. Like, what happened there? That's what we're trying to do. We need to measure that retention. You can look at this from a larger perspective on just one portfolio. So this is a portfolio of 150 donors. And in year 1, all those donors, all those 150 equal to $1.9 million. Those same donors by year 3 were now giving $584,000. So over that time period, just 3 years, we lost almost 70% of their value in this portfolio. This is what we mean by value attrition. Either donors stop giving altogether and or they give less. Here's another way to look at this. So if you look at it from view 1, this is how most nonprofits judge their major gift program. This is how CEOs, DODs, how did our major gift program do? And in year 1, 2.5 million. The second year, 3.1. So they grew by 21%. So if you just looked at it from that perspective, you'd say, yeah, that's pretty good growth. And that is good growth. But what we do at Veritus is kind of peel the onion back a bit. And we look at it as we're doing in view 2. So those donors that gave in year 1, that 2.5 million, those same donors in year 2 gave 1.3, or we lost 49% of their value in just 1 year. The only reason this program grew is because new donors came in and masked the behavior of the donors that gave in the year prior. So yes, you grew, but the question is, what happened with those donors that gave the 2.5 million and now they're only giving 1.3? And that's what most nonprofits don't look at. They just look at bottom line revenue. Here's another way to look at this. So this is one organization that in year 1, bottom line revenue, they grew from 20 million to 23.4 million roughly. So over that period in 3 years, almost 17% growth. So you're saying, okay, that's pretty good. I can like that. But let's look at it by giving year, both from individuals and organizations. And you can see that in year 1, those donors gave 2.5 million. And those same donors by year 3 were giving 7.5 million, or we lost around 30% overall. And then the next year, the class year, 3.1 million new revenue. But the next year, those donors only gave 1.7. So we lost 44%. And it's across the board in organizations as well. So from year 1 to year 3, this organization lost $9.1 million to value attrition. 9.1. Now remember, they grew 17% over 3 years, but at the same time, they lost $9.1 million. Now, this is what happened when we presented this. Of course, the executive director says, wow, I had no idea that we were losing this kind of revenue. But gosh, what if we were able to recoup at least half of that? That's another $4.5 million we could have had towards program. So what are we doing wrong? Which set it up perfectly for talking about, what the problem has been in their nonprofit. What aren't they doing correctly to keep donors?
Right. So this illustrates that, it's easy to think about major gifts that they need to be reported back to and told that they're making a difference. But really, it's all of your donors who need to know they're making an impact. And too often what happens is we fall into the red bubble area, which is they give a gift and when we don't tell them what their gift is doing or that it did something, they leave and they go someplace else. So that's really true of donors in the mid-level range where because we treat them all the same, like they're $10 donors, we don't report back, we're they don't give them opportunities to be a bigger part of the solution, right? We don't tell them about their impact. They don't believe that they can help again. So instead, in a mid-level program, we want to follow the blue bubbles and we want to tell donors personally about the impact so they'll want to help again. We really want to connect with donors and learn more. But I can tell you from experience, just this process of reporting back will show some really nice increases in giving. And I can tell you how, I can't tell you how often how we have like a $1,000 mid-level donor and suddenly they jump to $5,000 or $10,000 just because they're getting this personal impact information. In fact, in one organization, we had a $1,000 donor who committed to a $250,000 gift this year, all because of this. So that's on, we want to keep our donors. Second objective is we really want to, they're going to be critical to your success. And one of them is if you take mid-level seriously, and then a mid-level program will lift giving and help you move more donors into major gifts.
Finally, let's consider the return on investment, or ROI, of mid-level. We'll talk about the pipeline a little bit more in a minute, but for now, let's just consider those numbers at the bottom, the ROI. At the acquisition stage, you're likely not breaking even on the first gift from that donor. But as you move up the pipeline to general cultivation, you can begin to see a greater gain, and mid-level programs will build on the ROI from cultivation and continue to strengthen the overall net that you see from your donors. Again, this is due to improve retention, greater focus on the donor's passions and interests, and showing the donor how she's making a difference. And depending on the maturity of your mid-level program, you might see a return of 4 to 6 to 1 or higher. If for every dollar you spent on a mid-level program, your ROI was 4 to 1 or more, wouldn't that be worth it? Especially if the indirect benefits were improved quality of donors moving into major gifts and improved retention within the mid-level segment of your pipeline. Now, before we dive into this chart a bit, let me take a moment to explain what we're looking at here. This chart is specifically showing the percentage of donors who are moving up into the next level of giving. The rest of the donors at that giving level are either staying at that level, which we refer to as getting stuck, or actually decreasing their giving or no longer giving at all. Here we are looking at one particular organization's giving level data. We highly encourage you to do a donor file assessment for your organization to identify where your clogs might be. What happens with many organizations like this one is that they have a direct response program, but are left constantly searching for new major donors. And as a result, they begin looking outside of the program because they conclude that there simply aren't enough major donor prospects in the organization. But the reality is that most prospects are getting clogged at one key point in the pipeline. Looking at this chart, you'll see that a substantial clog happens at the 1,000 to 2,499 level. The way to consider this is that it has the lowest percentage of donors moving up to the next level, which means that most of the donors at this level are getting stuck or decreasing their giving or no longer giving. Often donors at this level are loyal and might include a number of monthly donors as well. And clogs in this pipeline like this are really what is causing fewer major donors to move up. So if you're able to unclog your donor pipeline and get more donors moving through the giving levels into major gifts, you'll see that it isn't as hard to find those new major donors after all. Now, mid-level really is the connector between an impersonal mass type of relationship and a personal, meaningful one. Without it, you'll see clogs that will stop the donor from moving from direct response to major gifts in an effective manner. All right, now that you know what the 3 objectives are and why they're so important, keep, lift, and move, right? Those are the 3 objectives. Let's discuss how you can accomplish your objective and move your entire program up.
So over the years, we've identified some keys to success, and they'll allow you to avoid common pitfalls and create a thriving mid-level program. Successful programs take the time to set things up right the first time. So even if you've already started a program, you can take the time to get the right people in a room and get your system set up correctly. Without taking that time for this and ensuring the right people are included, you're likely to experience some challenges down the road. So to be successful, you need to know if you're successful. And the only way to do that is to set the metrics for tracking up in your database so you can evaluate and report on the program once it's started. And then in this initial phase, there's a lot of things to consider and investigate to make sure you have a strong and clear foundation for success. So these are some of the things that we look at. The second key to success is, now this is not as easy as it may seem, but the first step is to gather your prudential pool using all those parameters. And then you need to make sure you understand your data and are collaborating with a team of people to ensure you know who to exclude. It's critical to have these conversations up front so you can make sure everyone is on board and the donors that are put in mid-level are the right donors. So we look at that and then you output all those fields. And here's what we're looking at in the initial file to start building your donor pool or your caseload. And then we try to make sure our data is clean. So every organization we've worked with has required some amount of data cleanup. And you're going to find that's the case for you too, probably. But here are some of the main things we have to look at in caseloads that are pretty common that we find. And they're not huge deals, but they're important for us to know.
All right. So just like in major gifts,
I'm going to jump in really quickly, Jeff.
Yeah.
A question here, Lisa. What are some of talk a little bit more about what are some of the things that happen in the data cleanup that's so important to catch? Just spend a little bit more, a few questions coming up about that.
Yeah, sure. Sometimes this is part of the reasons I'm kind of a nerd about mid-level and why I love it so much is we have our hands in so many records, and so we see things like we'll realize, oh, it looks like Jeff gave 5,000, but in reality, he has a foundation that wasn't linked and we didn't realize that, or there's a soft credit that's been hiding and he's actually given more than that. And we've got to work with our finance team and our database team to make sure those are showing up correctly. Or we might realize, ooh, our processing folks are not being super thorough. And all of a sudden they've created a second record for carrying Kendrick with a Y and there's been a typo. Little things like that will start to pop up and you just start to notice it. And you can that's why it's so important to have everyone in the room and say, who's getting these gifts? How are they being processed? What do we do if we find an error? Or we might be counting for gifts in kind and it looks like cash. And once we get in there, we go, ooh, that was a car donation. So they just kind of pop up. And some of those things people are like, oh, we've taken care of that. You might have, and there might be really small things, but they pop up and it's just good to be aware of them and know who to talk to about them.
Awesome. Now, just like in major gifts, having the right offers is critical in developing relationships with donors in mid-level. This step, again, requires a lot of collaboration with other departments. And as you find out more about a donor's passions and interests, the ability to tailor offers to the donor will make a significant difference in your relationship with the donor and prepare them for the major gift level. Creating meaningful touch points for your donors is, again, an important aspect of successful mid-level and major gift programs. While you won't be creating an individual touch plan for every donor on a mid-level caseload, you will be developing a 12-month plan that honors the donor, speaks to their passions and interests, and strengthens the relationships. Here's an overview of the various kinds of touch points we use in our communication plans to engage donors in different and meaningful ways. It's important to note that you don't want to be just sending out a bunch of touch points like an in-house mail vendor. You want to be sending out information that's relevant and of value to the donor. That's how you'll get them to engage and build trust. Successful mid-level programs also have the right person in the job. So being a mid-level officer is not for everyone. It's important that whoever you have in that role has the right skills, personality, and understanding what to do and what it takes.
Yep. And the last key to success that we're sharing today is about creating a process to smoothly and successfully move mid-level donors either to major gifts or out of the program if needed. And that means you need to understand the triggers and the indicators. And it also means working with the major gifts team to develop a process to transition donors that makes the donor feel respected and appreciated. Mid-level serves as a really important role in identifying donors that move to major gifts. And the mid-level officer has to pay close attention to key indicators that the donor may be interested in a deeper relationship with the organization, or, part of that process is going to be creating the business protocols to outline every aspect of your system and structure, including how to transition that relationship over, because there needs to be this strong collaboration and cooperation that is, again, successful and respectful to the donor. So one of the other ways that mid-level program moves a donor is actually moving them out of mid-level. And our ultimate goal is to ensure that every donor is part of the donor pipeline that best serves their inclination, their capacity to give, and their relationship with us. So some donors, for them, direct response is that place. And I want to emphasize that identifying a donor that should move to direct response and who's simply not a great prospect for major gifts is a win too, because it means you're honoring where the donor is and you're not spending time on a donor who doesn't really want that relationship. It's a great ROI for your organization.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you might be thinking, okay, this sounds all great, but is this relational approach to mid-level fundraising really better than an enhanced mail program? Let's take a moment to show the impact and focus mid-level program can have. Now, everything we've been saying might seem nice, but I want to reinforce that this really does work, which is why mid-level has been such a hot topic for the past few years. When we look at results from our clients, we can clearly see that a focused mid-level program with a dedicated mid-level officer yields ongoing impactful results. Now, let's take a moment to put everything we've just talked back into perspective around the misperception that mid-level programs cost way too much, because we hear that a lot from organizations. The truth here is that a mid-level program will cost you more money than you're currently spending. Based on data we've seen, you're probably spending about $12,000 or $20 per donor to send general direct mail to the 600 donors who would likely make up a mid-level caseload. And they're bringing in about $500,000 on average. A mid-level program adds about $75,000 to $100,000 in cost, which is focused on cultivating those donors who are currently bringing in about $500,000 to reduce value attrition and donor attrition to that vital group, moving qualified donors up into major gift programs, which has incredible benefits for the overall organization by allowing your MGO to focus on cultivating their donors and donor relationships. And it's also increasing net revenue through proper cultivation of mid-level donors and the promotion of major donors. Mid-level program is an investment, but that investment will yield more net revenue for your program. Your ROI for these 600 donors might come down a bit, but you will see the benefits of that in your net revenue and longer term in the donors who are moving up into major gift portfolios, which leads us to the next obstacle that could be standing in your way. We've worked with a lot of nonprofits who have been doing mid-level work for many years. And when we look at the data of many of the organizations who do not have mid-level programs, we see about 0.2 to 1.2% of donors moving into major gifts organically. So no wonder so many fundraisers leaders think they need to look elsewhere for major donors. But when a mid-level program is implemented, you can see between 3 and 3.5% of donors moving into major gifts, which means you could see a good number of qualified major donors almost double when you implement a robust mid-level program.
Sorry, Jeff, my little script disappeared on me. I'm here.
All right.
So the bottom line here, it keeps moving on me like my eyes are, something's wrong with them. But the bottom line here is that mid-level really is a big deal. And it can make this huge difference in your fundraising effort. And when we work with our clients, what we hear is some amazing stories about how the organization is learning more about the donor's passions, how they reactivate a donor, and about a donor who has deepened their connection to the organization. It's really incredible. And we want that for you too. Like, this is what we do every day and we love it and we want it for you.
All right. So let me ask, if we had a way to teach you how to develop a mid-level program that would produce results and strengthen your donor pipeline and move more donors into major gift portfolios, how many of you would be interested? All right. I see a lot of hands raised. Okay. So our next offering of the certification course in mid-level fundraising starts on March 6th. and provides a comprehensive training on the system and structure you can implement to create and grow a successful mid-level program by hiring and retaining the right mid-level officer, establishing critical data systems, and integrating the fundamentals for effectively and efficiently managing the mid-level caseloads, including evaluation and reporting, and how to smoothly transition donors to major gifts. When we looked at different programs out there and what it would cost to get all the bits and pieces to be successful, we found it could easily add up to almost $16,750, which is why we think it's so important to offer affordable and valuable online training content to the nonprofit community. Usually this course costs $1,997, but at the end of this webinar, we'll give you a coupon code to get $200 off the upcoming session, making your cost just $1,797. Now, here's a note from a Veritus Academy alumna about how this course impacted her organization's mid-level program. And what Beth is basically saying here is that this course gave her everything she needed to create a successful mid-level program, because the process and structure we teach helps you identify your donors' passions and interests. Now, if you're looking to grow or start a mid-level program and take your work with donors to the next level, this is really a course you don't want to miss. And if you want to take the $200 off of your upcoming course, which starts on March 6th, go to veritusgroup.com/courses and select certification courses in mid-level fundraising and use coupon code March23VGA on the registration page.
Awesome. Thank you all. I have so many great questions, and you all just keep them coming, because these create great conversation. You won't be the only one wondering. So pop that question in there. This is from Joe. Jeff, starting with you. Does this take into account, this is looking back at the assessment, right? Yeah. Does this take into account that some of these gifts are ultimate major gifts for donors who will not match that cash level again?
I'm not sure what that question means, but when
so
we
if you're
do
doing an assessment and looking at value attrition, what about people that it's just a one-time big gift?
Yeah, it will take that into account. So we will, once we get the data to do our assessment, we'll look at certain donors that we call variant donors that are one-offs that we've not seen any more giving, and we take them out of the data assessment so that we get a better read on what the actual value attrition is.
Awesome. And if any of y'all want to add in the chat box more to your question, if we don't get it, just pop it in there, because we want to make sure we answer your question. All right, Lisa, this is from Jessica. How do you do all of this with just one development director who is responsible for everything? Great question.
Yeah, Jessica, we feel your pain. You're not alone. It's not the easiest thing to do, but what we'd say is to look at your roles and how much time you have to deal with donors, and then look at who those donors are. So for instance, if these are mid-level donors and that's all you can do, then how many can you work with? And we'd say a full caseload is like 500 to 700, average of maybe 600. And so if half your time goes to donors, and maybe make that 300. Or if you're mostly working with major gifts, our caseload size there is 150. If you're working half-time with donors directly, make that 75. So just cut the number down a little bit and be gracious with yourself, and just do what you can to be personal and relational with these donors and have a plan for them, because it's going to make a difference.
Awesome. Jeff, we'll start with you. And I know, Lisa, you'll have some things to add. From Sean, what are some of the indicators you found that mid-level donors are ready to move up to major gifts?
So when we look at the data, one of the things that I see is when donors are giving pretty good sized gifts and they're giving the same amount every year. Mm-hmm. So it means they have the ability, but no one's asking them to do any more than that. Yeah. And so that's a big indicator that we see, that donors, that there are a number of, and it's also looking at the quantity of donors that are giving at those levels, and where we see that clog. So if we see that clog happening where there's all of a sudden, there's at one level, there's just a ton of donors, and at the next level, we see, like, for example, we'll see a clog where they might have 2,500 donors that have given $1,000 to $24.99. The next level, like $121. There's a clog there. That means that these donors probably could move up, but they've not been challenged to do that.
Right. So that's an indication, right, Jeff? We put them in mid-level and suddenly they move off of what I call the Pavlovian wheel, right? They go from giving, let's say, 2,500 every year, and all of a sudden they give 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 because we've been reaching out.
That's right.
That's an indication. And the other thing is when we're connecting by phone or by email, you'll hear indications, right? So they're very passionate. They want to come for a visit or a tour or volunteer. Their giving goes up. They share with you information about things that would indicate they have more capacity than we know about, either other things they give to, or about they have an IRA account or a donor advised fund, or they just finished, their annual month-long, vacation in the south of France. You go, there's capacity there that may not show up in a prospect research report.
That's right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I mean, we see often, Lisa, when we just start the initial process of introducing the mid-level officer to these mid-level donors, and all of a sudden we see gifts going up without even asking.
Yep.
Just the personal outreach. And that's an indicator these donors are just wanting to do more.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. This is from Michelle for you, Lisa. What's the best way to qualify those new $1,000, $1,500 donors? Assuming you can get them on the phone, what do you ask that they will indicate whether they should move into your caseload or not? So you may want to clarify qualified for mid-level versus major gift as well.
Yes. Yeah. And that's a great question, Michelle. So then it's a good distinction, Karen, is that in mid-level, we're assuming they are relationally qualified until they tell us otherwise. So if you've been exposed to our processes and the Veritus way, in major gifts, we want to put people on the caseload who want that two-way connection. In mid-level, we keep talking to them until they tell us, like, that's enough, don't talk to me, or we find out other things about their inability to connect. So if we are in the major gift realm, to qualify a donor, it's any indication that they're open to our communication. And we sort of tease inside, but it really is a good illustration to think about this like a dating relationship, right? So a lot of times people think, to be qualified, I need to know everything there is to know about Karen, and she's like willing to have me come and sit down and have coffee with her tomorrow. But that's sort of, jumping too far ahead in the relationship when Karen's just picked up the phone the first time. But if Karen says to me, sure, Lisa, you can reach out. Yeah, happy to. Or yeah, here's my email. I'd prefer that you email me information. That's an indication that Karen's open to that relationship. So we're going to take her at her word, and we're going to start emailing her for now and consider her qualified.
So just to be clear,
yes, ma'am.
We're not qualifying. You don't have to qualify donors into mid-level. You do in major gift portfolios.
Right.
So that's the difference.
Yes.
And what do you mean by qualified, Jeff?
Meaning what Lisa said, where the donor is telling us that, yes, I want a relationship with you. I want to hear from you. I'll meet with you. And gives you the indicator that they want that relationship. And we know in the major gift side that only a third of donors who meet your major gift metric want that relationship. And that's why we want qualified donors. Now, the beauty of mid-level is that if you have that program up and running and you've got major gifts going, the mid-level team, or the one mid-level officer, if you have one, is able to qualify donors before they get into that portfolio. In other words, they're already qualified. So your major gift officer doesn't need to do that work any longer, which is awesome for them.
Yeah. I think the balance there is like not to be so strict that you're like, well, Karen wouldn't let me come over for coffee, she's not qualified, versus being too lenient. I've had a fundraiser go, well, Jeff hung up on me, he's qualified, he picked up the phone. It's like, no. So you gotta kind of think through, like, okay, did they indicate they're open? Like, they responded to the email, they said, thanks for calling, that sort of thing.
So along this same track, we'll start with you, Jeff. This is from Alyssa. How do you get to know your mid-level donors better and build more meaningful relationships with them when most of the time they don't pick up the phone or respond to your touch points?
Well, the first thing that we do to help the mid-level officer is tier the mid-level portfolio, A, B, and C level. So we concentrate on that A level. Those are donors that are giving at high levels, and their frequency level or their recency level shows that they're really your top mid-level donors who have the ability potentially to move into major gifts. And we do that so we can help structure the mid-level officer's time correctly. So that's the first step. And then those are the donors we're reaching out to. We have a whole series of introducing ourselves to mid-level donors to get them to engage. A number of different ways, sending out a welcome letter, sending out surveys, reaching them through different ways, text message if you have them, or email. And so you're trying different ways to engage the donor, and then trying to get them to engage.
Yeah. I think I'd only add to that we also try to ask good questions, right? So we've worked with people where they say, I've been communicating with people for years, but what they've been doing is sending stuff out with almost no personalization, except for maybe, thanks for your support, Lisa, right? But if I send something out and say in an email, Jeff, I noticed that you are giving to this program. I'd love to connect with you. What's the best way, email or phone? I've now asked Jeff a question. So we call that like a poll question. And it doesn't even have to be about the organization. It could be anything like, Jeff, it's summer. Here's a great information from our cancer team about how to prevent skin cancer. What sunscreen do you use, or where are you going to vacation this year? Right? It could be a simple question, because when I get an email, if there's no call to action, I'll be like, it's nice, delete. As opposed to if there's a simple question like, oh, thanks for asking. I'd actually rather you sent me by email than called me. Right? I'm going to answer that question.
So
That's
Jamie's question, what are the best ways to connect these donors with impact stories, phone calls, emails, direct mail, et cetera? It's what you're saying is try different things.
Yeah.
And put a poll question in there so you can get a response. It's
there isn't. That's a good question, because there isn't a best way. It depends on donors. All of those ways are ways that you can try to get donors to engage, and every donor is different. Yeah. And that's one of the things you'll find out. How do they like to be communicated with?
Yeah. And we're building trust, right? So what happens is they see the letter, it has our name on it, maybe our picture, then they hear our voice. And it's like over time, they might respond to one just because listen, they're like, oh, okay, this is a real person.
Yep.
So Lisa, we'll start with you on this one. What advice would you give to someone just starting out as a mid-level officer? And Jeff, you can add.
Question. I think what I'd share is that it's really important to follow a process and be consistent, because our donors, they might have this suspicion, right, that we're like another vendor, we're trying to get money from them. Like they're kind of afraid, they kind of don't know us. And so if you say, hey, I'm gonna call you, and then you don't, you've broken their trust again. So it's important you follow that process and be consistent with your touch points. And I think in order to do that, you've got to make sure you're keeping track of what you've done, when you've done it, what their response has been, and whether we have a donor engagement plan that we like, or if it's inside your database. You just got to be consistent and follow the process. And the other thing I'd tell you that does is there's almost like a mental game that goes on with this, right? Where it is a lot of people, it is a lot of touch points. You'd be like, oh, I'm driving them crazy. So it's nice to look back and go, oh no, I've talked to Jeff twice in the last 8 weeks. That's not too much. I'm going to do my touch point like I planned this month. So it helps you if you stay organized and follow the process. That'd be my biggest advice.
All right. Jeff, this is from Jamie. When determining who should be in your mid-level program, is there a percentage of our active donors who should fit into the mass, mid, and major gift? How do you sort of figure out where people go?
You have to, when you analyze your data, you will be able to tell pretty obviously where your mass, mid, and major is. For some organizations, large organizations, their mid-level is could be anywhere at 5,000 to 9,000, even higher. Could be 1,000 to 4,999. You could have I've seen some smaller organizations where their mid-level is 100 to 999, and major gifts is 1,000 and over. You'll be able to look at if you're able to look at your data and your data pyramid, you would be able to see how many donors, what's the cum giving amount in each level, and be able to determine where your mid-level is, and as well as your major gifts. But I wouldn't say there's a set percentage of this many of your donors should be here, this many should be here. It's let's look at where it is now, and then we'll be able to say, gosh, you really need to do more donor acquisition, or you're doing great on donor acquisition. You need to develop a mid and major gift program for them to go place, to move up. And that's what we see in the assessment that we do.
Mm-hmm.
So Lisa, this is from Jamie. So is there a method to getting more people into the mid-level from the mass level? Sort of what is that process, and what do you start doing with them differently?
I love that question, Jamie. One of the things we recommend is having a thank you policy. So the mid-level officer would be thanking unassigned donors below the mid-level program. So for instance, in the illustration Jeff just used, if $1,000 is where your mid-level program starts, maybe you're thanking unassigned donors at $750 one-time gift, because what will happen is you'll start to see that they're going to, some of them will respond. And so when someone gives a second gift and now all of a sudden they're up at 1,500, they're one to add to your mid-level program. It's kind of an indication, and you can track the ROI for that and know whether that's been a successful part of the program in thanking donors. So we definitely recommend kind of dropping a little bit below mid-level to thank donors personally, because it is unique. It is something that most organizations do not do.
The other is within your direct response program, using solid direct response techniques in your ask strings. So you're trying to move donors up and you're challenging them. Don't just use a static ask string in your solicitation. So in other words, you get the coupon, the check off box. They can't be the same all the time. Use it based on your donor's giving. So for example, let's say your last gift from the donor was $100. Then you would start an ask string at $250, $500, $750, and then maybe $100, so that you're helping challenge the donor to give more. So hopefully you have a good direct response team or vendor that is able to do that work. A lot of nonprofits just put out the same ask string for every appeal. And that will hurt those donors that actually want to give more. So use based on what the donor is giving, and then gently ask them to give more.
Awesome. These are great questions. Here's another good one for you, Jeff, to start out. This is from Kristen. If a donor empathetically says they will not increase their giving and have been giving at that level every year for 20 plus years, how do you best approach the relationship in hopes that they may decide to increase without disrespecting their explicit wishes to not be solicited for more?
I think you have to honor the donor. And so if the donor is saying to you, I'm not going to give more, I'm going to give this amount every year, you just do a great job of stewarding that donor. And then move on to other donors that do want communication with you. Too oftentimes we have this idea that we need to make the donor do something they don't want to do because they have the ability to. If a donor is telling you, I don't want this, then honor that for the donor. And by doing that work, maybe the donor will gain the trust that they need and say, you know what, they've been doing everything I asked them to do. And because of that, I'm going to give more, or I'm going to leave them in my estate plan.
And can I add to that, Jeff?
Sure.
I think that's where our tiering comes in too, right? So we had a donor like that one time that said, we'll give you this $400,000 every year, but don't ask for more. Well, you're not going to put them just in direct mail kind of thing and say, oh, thanks, see you later. But you're also not going to leave them at tier A because you don't want to invest your time there. They've kind of told you that. So you might tier them a little lower so you manage where you spend your time, right? So how much they're giving makes a difference too.
This is anonymous for you, Lisa. I've been given the advice to always call versus email and to keep trying to call rather than leave a voice message. Thoughts?
That is an interesting piece of advice, because I work with people that are terrified to call sometimes, like just different people, like where we've grown up, our age, different things we like or don't like the phone or have opinions. But that's why in mid-level, we really recommend trying different methods to see what the donor responds to and likes. And one thing we recommend with phone calls is maybe the first time leave a message and make sure it's brief and it's to the point, and that you don't ask them to call you back, tell them you're going to call back. And then the second time, call, but don't leave a message. And if you have their email, if you email right away and say, hey, Jeff just left a message, I'd love to connect, here's my number. That's beneficial. And then maybe call again, but try different methods, because everyone does have their preference and you don't know if the phone number is correct. So I'd mix it up.
Yes, go onto our website, free resources. We have a great white paper on mid-level fundraising, and share that with whomever is telling you that. All right. Jeff, what do you think the role of prospecting data mining services is, either at mid-level or major gift, versus sticking to info that the donor tells you directly?
I think if you are struggling to find mid and major donors, that using data mining, modeling, all of those ways is a great way to start a potential conversation with donors who may have capacity and propensity to give. And so, we've had a number of clients use modeling and use the mid-level team to help qualify those donors. To see if a $25 donor that comes off really high on a well screening or a model actually is someone that is wanting to have that conversation with you and wants to give more and is really invested in your organization. But I would not look at it as the answer to all of your problems. Now, the problem is that a lot of nonprofit leaders always look at, well, what's the newest thing out there? What can I do? And I always want to find that big donor out there. I know that there's probably a donor that's giving $10 that could give us $1 million. And that's probably true. But what happens is so much time and energy and resources goes out to try to find that, including human resources, that they neglect the donors that have already said, hey, I love you. I'm giving you, they're indicating to us that they love us through the gifts that they're making, and we're not cultivating them properly, and they're going away. This is that donor value attrition problem. So fix that first. And if you do that well, and you are still saying, hey, our pipeline into mid and major is still slow, then that's another way to be able to do that.
Thank you. Last question here from Leanne for you, Lisa. How do you suggest, do you have suggestions for how major gifts can work alongside as mid-level gets off the ground? Major gifts is still needing to do lots of qualifying while mid-level ramps up. Is there a general timeline that it starts to take off? So both are sort of being built at the same time. So give some perspective.
I love these questions. I feel like we have a webinar on some of these questions just all by themselves. They're great questions today. So thank you all.
They're so good.
Yeah. So I think we go backwards and say the general timeline for both of these to really, where the rubber really hits the road kind of thing, is about 18 to 24 months, where you see like, oh my gosh, we're firing at all cylinders. So it really does help to be patient. And I would say it takes about 6 to 8 months to really get them off the ground. Like that's how long it takes to qualify a major gift caseload. And that's how long it takes to get through the entire introduction process with the mid-level caseload. So somewhere in between there is a good sweet spot. And one of the things that I'd say is if you're starting both at the same time, when Jeff said earlier, 1 in 3 will connect with us in major gifts. So if you're in major gifts and you need a caseload of 150 and you're starting fresh, we'd give you 450 unqualified donors. When we start mid-level at the same time, we might drop that number a little bit, because if someone's at the bottom, so they're number 450, they might be number 1 in a mid-level caseload. So we might put only 350 or into the major gift pool, because the mid-level person is going to keep qualifying them and moving them over at the same time. So we might adjust those numbers a little bit, and that would be kind of how we keep them going at the same time.
Awesome. I'm going to pop in here just the link to our white papers, and you all can peruse around. There's a number of incredible resources. one thing I love about Veritus Group is we give everything away.
Mhm.
So Jessica, I know you had a question about that, so you can check there for that white paper on mid-level fundraising.
Mhm.
All right, so to close us out, as always, I'm always like, okay, what's that little bubbling up words of wisdom you want to leave us with before I close this webinar out?
Well, I would say if you're on the fence about taking this course, I'd really urge you to do it. We've had hundreds and hundreds of fundraisers take the mid-level course, and it has helped them tremendously in starting their own programs, start the idea of actually getting their data together and trying to start their own program and at least getting this thing going for their nonprofit. But the course itself is incredibly valuable. It's a lot of fun. It is a lot of work, but what we've heard across the board is how effective it is for the people that take the course. And there's all kinds of great ways to learn through different media, videos, podcasts, readings, all kinds of things. So we try to make it fun and make it easy for you to learn in different styles. And so, yeah, if you're really on the fence about it, I'm just urging you to take that leap because so many people have found it helpful for them.
Lisa, final words?
My only words of wisdom is I really do love mid-level. I think it is the sweet spot in the pipeline because it's just such an incredible way of connecting with our donors and learning more about them. And I think that is just a really, really fun place to be. So when you can do it with all the resources and the tools that you need, it makes it even more fun. So I hope that you enjoy the resources and things you gain from the course.
Awesome.
Thank you all.
All right.
So thank you for being with us today. And just as a reminder, you'll receive a recording of this webinar and the mid-level readiness assessment. Ooh, we give you all the systems and structures to be successful. So I love that you're going to get the readiness assessment today. To register for our upcoming session of the certification course in mid-level fundraising, visit us at www.veritusgroup.com/courses and use this code March23VGA at checkout to get $200 off when you sign out by Friday. And as always, we're available to assist you with any questions. So email us at academy@veritusgroup.com. We hope to see you in the upcoming course and do take care.